Again, we'll turn to Genesis chapter 22. We'll read verses 13 through verse 19. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh. It is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of the heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, in multiplying I will multiply thy seed, as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy stead, in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. These are the climactic portion. This is the climactic portion of the most well-known event in the life of Abraham. Again, it is an event up to this point without precedent. Nothing to parallel it to. And it's certainly one of the most profound of all biblical accounts. What is recorded here is a record of God's providence, the faithfulness of God, the ability of God. It's an amazing illustration of the love of God, the care that God had for Abraham and Isaac. It's a foreshadowing, of course, of God sending His own Son to Calvary. It's a powerful example of faith. It's a powerful example of victory in God. I want to develop the thought of the message from verse 13, which is the climax of the account. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, following God calling out to him and instructing him. And it says he looked. And then notice, and behold. And behold. What we want to speak upon is arriving at and behold. And behold. I believe God's people miss out on a lot of and behold because they don't stay the course, trusting God. The word and there is, of course, a connecting word. In this case, it is connected or linked to Abraham, lifting up his eyes and looking. It's also a word of sequence. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold. There's a sequence. It's a word of sequence. The word behold is a word indicative of the extraordinary, the momentous. It is a word indicative of wonder. In this case, and behold, a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. God's provision for Abraham and Isaac. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. God's provision. God will provide. And here it is. God provided. So what we see here is Abraham and Isaac experiencing the miraculous provision of God. The experience of the wonder of God. And behold. And we too can experience and behold a ram caught in a thicket. The verses prior to this reveal how Abraham and Isaac got to this point. And behold. It tells us how they got there. Again, arriving at and behold. Our lives as God's people ought to be and can be an experience of the wonder of God. All around us is the wonder of God. Most live in oblivious to it. But all around us. And I believe every day we can experience the wonder of God. In fact, our lives ought to be marked by and behold. And behold. So let's consider the steps leading to and behold. Here in Genesis 22, including verse 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold. If you read up to verse 13, 44 times there is the word and. 44 times. A word of sequence. And then we finally get to and behold. And that's my point. There's a sequence to and behold. Again, it's a word of connection, the word and. It's a word of sequence. Every verse in Genesis 22, with the exception of verse 4, begins with and. And verse 4 begins with then, which also is a word of sequence, a word of connection. So everything's connected. A sequence of acts leading to and behold. And behold. There is a spiritual, what this is telling us is there is a spiritual progression toward the place of and behold. And behold. Sadly, many, if not most, of God's people hear stories, hear the accounts of others, of and behold, but they don't really experience it themselves. And it's because they're not in the sequence. Again, there's a sequence. The first thing we see, God was a reality to Abraham. God was relevant in the life of Abraham. In verse 1, God called Abraham by name. He did so again in verse 11. God called to Abraham. God talked to Abraham. And Abraham was accustomed to God doing so. And Abraham was familiar with the voice of God. He knew that voice. My sheep know my voice. We read in chapter 12, verse 1, and the Lord said unto Abraham. Chapter 12, verse 7, and the Lord appeared unto Abram and said. God talked to Abram. Chapter 13, verse 14, and the Lord said unto Abram. Chapter 15, verse 1, the word of the Lord came unto Abram. Chapter 17, verse 1, the Lord appeared unto Abram and said. Genesis 17, 3, and God talked with him. Chapter 18, verse 1, and the Lord appeared unto him. And in verse 13, and the Lord said unto Abraham. And here in Genesis 21 and verse 12, and God said unto Abraham. Abraham knew God. He personally experienced God in his daily life. He had the blessed assurance that he belonged to God. He had the assurance that God loved him. He had the assurance that God was faithful and that God was able. He had the assurance that God always did what was best for him. And he knew that God had a plan. And he knew that God worked that plan and he didn't have to work it. He knew all of those things. He knew that God was in absolute control of all things. People say, well, yeah, we all know that, do we? I don't think so. Not hardly. He was also sensitive and very much available to God. Verse 1, Abraham's response to the voice of God, which should always be our response. Here I am. Here I am. What do you want? Verse 11, there it is again. Here I am. Here I am. Abraham heard, Abraham knew the voice of God. And there was an immediate response. Here I am. It is a response of availability. It is a response of readiness. A response of willingness. A response of submission to the Lord. All God had to say was His name. And Abraham was available. And he was ready. And he was willing. And he was submissive. In other words, God had Abraham's attention. God had Abraham's attention. That needs to be so of you and I. God has our attention in everything. And I believe this was maintained all the way to, and behold, a ram caught in a thicket. God had his attention. When he got up that morning and he made all the preparations, God had his attention. 3 days, God had his attention all the way. And again, that was maintained all the way through to and behold. He was submissive. He was obedient to God's will. Verse 2, we read of God's command to Abraham. Again, a startling demand. Something you would never expect. Never. Something you could never plan for. Again, read verse 2. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah. And he didn't say, and when you get there, I'll tell you what to do from that point. No, that's not what he said. And offer him there for a burnt offering. You go there and you offer up Isaac. When you get to the land of Moriah, the general area, I'll tell you which mountain. But you're going. I want you to go to offer up Isaac for a burnt offering. Again, Abraham knew all about a burnt offering. He knew what that meant. He knew what that meant. Again, this would go against all natural affection, all the natural inclinations of Abraham. It would go against every fiber of his being. But there it was. Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and offer him a burnt offering. The record again is silent about the emotions of Abraham. But that does not mean that Abraham was not filled with all kinds of emotions. But the record is silent concerning the emotions of Abraham. But we only have to put ourselves in his place to imagine what he felt. Without a doubt, there was some turmoil of heart and mind. Without a doubt, there was some spiritual wrestling. But regardless of the emotions, regardless of the struggles not recorded, we read in verse 3, and Abraham rose up early in the morning. And there he is. God is a reality in his life. Rose up early in the morning, sensitive and available to God. Ready, willing to do what God commanded. Submissive to God. His life has been marked by the purpose of God. And he gets up that morning with a purpose for God. Every morning we ought to get up with a purpose for God. He's filled with passion. He's filled with zeal. Oh, there's all kinds of other emotions and struggles. But there he is. Verse 3, he's preparing. He's making arrangements to do what God said. He's planning on doing what God said. Every day, we ought to get up preparing to do what God said. Making whatever arrangements we need to make to do what God said. Planning on serving God. We've preached on the past in Joshua. Plan to serve God. As for me and my house, we will. He's planning on serving God. Needs to be our plan. Needs to be our life plan. Needs to be our daily plan. Serve God. Well, I've got plans. That's fine, as long as they don't get in the way with God. And I believe this submissive spirit was maintained all the way through to and behold. So everything in the chapter is progressing toward and behold. Think about what Abraham knew. Regardless of the depth and the array of emotions and struggles that Abraham was feeling, he knew and he personally experienced the person where the instruction came from. And he knew the promise of God. He knew that there was no circumstance where God would break His promise, though this certainly appears to be one. He knew that there was no circumstance where God was not able to do what He said He would do. And without a doubt, he knew that God loved him. And God had His best interest in mind. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, knowing these things. Rose up early in the morning to do what God had said. And again, I believe what Abraham knew, he maintained all the way through to end behold. Don't forget what you know about God. Don't forget it. The world has a way of snatching those things out of our minds. Don't forget what you know. What you know. As we mentioned earlier, Abraham stepped out with God. Regardless of the array and the depth of emotions and the struggles that were confronting Abraham, he rose up early in the morning. And it says, and went unto the place which God had told him. He did so knowing God. All of our comings and goings ought to be knowing God. He knew that God has a plan for his life, and he knows that that's the best plan. You see, you don't have to come up with a plan for your life. You need to find out God's plan and just trust it. Just trust it. He embraced that plan. He didn't try to change it. Didn't try to make tweaks to it. He trusted God with the plan. And that morning, he stepped out with God. The very first step getting into that wagon would have been a difficult step, humanly speaking. But Abraham stepped out with God. And he began that journey with God. And he continued that journey for 3 days with God. For 3 days, there he is. God is a reality in his life. He has a sensitivity toward God. He's available to God. He's ready. He's willing for God. He's submissive to God. His life is marked by the purpose of God. He has a plan. And God is in that plan. He's filled with passion and zeal. Submissive. Knowing God. And he is, verse 3, preparing, making arrangements, planning on doing what God said. Knowing God and going with God. And there he is. Pressing on. 3 days. 3 days. Day after day. Holding on to the faithfulness of God. Day after day, holding on to the ability of God. Day after day, holding on to the love of God. Imagine again the thoughts and the emotions that Abraham was experiencing during those 3 days. But through it all, he's focused upon God. He's leaning upon God. He's cleaving to Him. He's drawing from Him. And there he is. With God. Yes, on that same wagon you have Isaac. You have the 2 servants. But Abraham is with God. He's making the journey with God. And I believe that Abraham maintains that all the way through to and behold. So tracing the journey the 3 days, and all the way up that mountain, there is Abraham with God. We see him all the way. God is more than a doctrine, more than a point of theology to him. God is reality in his life. Doctrine will not take you to where this took Abraham. Theology will not take you to where Abraham wound up. God has to be more than doctrine, more than theology. God is reality in his life. So real that he's sensitive to God. And he maintains that spirit for 3 days. Here I am. Here I am. Again, he's ready. He's willing. And then we come to our text. And you have the experience of, and behold. And behold. Again, most read over those 2 words, and behold. Oh, but the meaning of those 2 words. And behold. And what we read in verses 13 through 19 is the end result of everything said thus far. There is Abraham. He's in the place where God led him. And we read, and behold, a ram caught in a thicket. I believe You see, you can believe this when you believe God is sovereign. And you have to believe this. The Lord led that particular ram that He had for Abraham into that particular thicket. And He caused that particular ram in that particular thicket to get caught, to get stuck. And He caused Abraham to look up at that particular time and see a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. You see, Abraham didn't just see a ram caught in a thicket. He saw God's provision for him. That's what he's seeing. Oh, many times we just see the ram caught in the thicket. And it's God's provision. And I believe God has a ram caught in the thicket for every one of us. All the time. And many times we don't get there. Again, there's a sequence too. And behold. But he not only saw God's provision, he took it. He took it. He didn't just see the ram and say, wow, that's amazing. And then went ahead and killed Isaac. He took it. He received it to himself. It says, and Abraham went and took the ram. God didn't just drop it in Abraham's arms. It was in a thicket. I don't know how far away the thicket was. Doesn't matter. Abraham saw it, and he went over to it. He not only saw, he took God's provision. And he not only took God's provision, he prevented from it. Or benefited from it. And how did he benefit from it? By using it for what God would have it for. And he benefited. And it says, and offered him the God-provided ram for a burnt offering. Abraham enjoyed God's provision. God provides for us every single day. And we ought to enjoy God's provision. We ought to recognize it as God's provision. So there's Abraham. And he's now enjoying God's best for him. But there was a sequence of steps that brought him to this point where he could enjoy God's best for him. And there's where numerous people fail. They never get to that point of enjoying God's best for them. And oh, wonderful time that he and Isaac had. Remember what he said to his servants? The lad and I will go and worship. And that's what they're doing right now. This point in the text. Abraham would not have experienced that anywhere else. All for him there. Had to get to that place. And to get to that place took a sequence of steps. A sequence of steps of trusting God, leaning upon God, embracing God. And behold, God did exactly what He said He would do in His timing. And again, Abraham wouldn't have experienced that anywhere else. So no matter what your circumstances, no matter how perplexed you may be, and no matter how much you do not understand your circumstances, or how much you don't understand the instructions of God. We don't always understand the instructions of God. Step out with Him. You don't have to wait till you understand. You step out with Him. And you continue in that direction. And you will eventually come to a very special place where there will be a ram caught in a thicket. And behold, you will experience God's wondrous provision, miraculous provision. You will experience that which will fill you with amazement and wonder. When on this path in the direction of God, what was Abraham anticipating? 3 days. God will provide Himself a lamb. He's anticipating that. He's anticipating God doing what He said He would do. He's anticipating it. We are to live in anticipation of wonderful things because of the faithfulness of God. Anticipate wonderful things. For there is a ram caught in a thicket. You just need to get to that place. What a blessing that there is such a thing as a ram caught in a thicket. From verse 14, we see that all of this had an overwhelming impact upon Abraham. He named the place Jehovah-Jireh, meaning the Lord will see to it. God will, and the Lord will see to it. You don't have to. You don't have to. God will see to it. The Lord will see to it. He will provide. It's not only that He provides, but He does so at His perfect time. You see, going with God is an exciting adventure. And it's an adventure that is possible for every child of God. Heading in the direction of God's place. Yet how often we miss out on God's best. Children of Israel and Canaan, perfect example. Because we refuse to move in God's direction. Because we refuse to abide in God's direction. I wonder how many rams in a thicket we have missed in our life. How many rams in a thicket we never saw because our eyes were on the wrong things. Then you go to verses 15 through 18. And Abraham is given more assurance of the blessing of God. And again, we see God saying, I will. Verse 17, I will. I will. That's what led to that point. He says, Abraham, you just keep following me. You just keep going with me. I will. So there's assurance of more blessings. God brings us to the place of blessing and then tells us, hey, there's more. There's more. So He's being further prepared when God tells Abraham again, I will, he's being further prepared for his life. Verse 19, so Abraham returned unto his young men. So as Abraham and Isaac left the God-appointed place, that mountain, they're on their way back to the young men. What do you think was on the minds of Abraham and Isaac? What do you think was on their minds? Well, you know what was on their minds. That ram caught in the thicket. God did everything He said He would. What do you think they talked about on the way down from that mountain? Oh, it's a nice day, isn't it? Wind's just right. Weather's nice. When we get home, I'm going to do this and this and this. No, that's not what they talked about. They talked about what God did. That's all they could talk about because it was so real. As they came down that mountain, what do you think they felt? What do you think they felt? When they spoke to the servants, what do you think they told them? Oh, what a story they had to tell. And we read, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, a 3-day journey. And what do you think was on their minds for those 3 days? I don't think they got over this in 2 minutes, like God's people do now. Okay, we're over this, what's next? For 3 days on the way back, they thought about it. They meditated upon it. They talked about it. That was the topic of their conversation. Abraham and Isaac have experienced and enjoyed the wonder of God. But there was a sequence of events that led to that. Now, no doubt, you can be sitting here today or anywhere, and God reveals the wonder of Himself. It's a wonderful thing. But I believe every day we can experience that. But there is a sequence of steps. And we need to make sure that we're taking the right steps to and behold, a ram. Yes, everybody else might just see a ram, but Abraham saw it as God's provision. And that's exactly what it was. How grateful we ought to be. God is faithful. God is faithful. And behold. Again, it's an update. As we said last week, the building that we were looking at has been sold. That's a done deal. It's been finalized. The Lord has given us miraculous provision, $191,000. And we need to trust Him. We need to be looking to Him. We need to be praying that the Lord bring us to that place, and behold. And behold. There it is. There it is. And I believe, you can believe what you want, but I believe we're almost there. We're close. It could happen any day. May happen today. And behold. There it is. Trust God. Go with God. You'll see wonderful things. Brother Dave, if you'll come and lead us